Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Wire Wrap. I'm Jahnavi Sen. The US and India have reached a trade deal, though the details remain unclear. The latest tranche of the Epstein files have made headlines. And General Naravane's censored memoirs are back in the news. With me today to talk about all of this, I have Dipanshu Mohan, who is Professor of Economics at O.P. Jindal Global University, and Devi Rupa Mitra, Diplomatic Affairs Editor at The Wire. Thank you both so much for joining me. So it's been 2 days now since US President Donald Trump wrote a post on Truth Social saying that there's been a historic deal between India and the US under which Indian goods will be charged an 18% tariff in the US and American goods will be charged a 0% tariff in India. Neither of the countries have released any official documentation. Largely what we know is based off of what Trump and others in the US government have said. Now Trump has said a whole range of things, that India will buy $500 billion worth of American goods, that India is going to stop importing Russian oil, that India is going to open up its agricultural sector. But again, the Indian side has not said much other than saying that this is a deal that is going to be very beneficial, and the details remain quite murky. Dipanshu, I wanted to come to you first. What do you make of what's happening with this?
So first of all, thanks for having me here. I think one of the key insights that has come out over the last 2-3 days of this sort of confused narrative around in the India-US trade agreement is that it seems that America and the US president have sort of bullied their way in to making India sign what would otherwise not be part of a traditionally established trade negotiation process. It was quite clear that on both sides, the Indian and the American sides, I mean, from the Indian side anchored by the Minister of Commerce, Piyush Goyal, there was a process of a trade deal negotiation happening. India was taking its time, rightfully so, because there were some very critical areas, including agriculture, energy, technology, as spaces where India wanted to avoid giving too much away in terms of access to the American market. But it seems to me that something has happened with the call between the two leaders that's pushed that process back. If that wasn't the case, we should have known more by now. It's been a couple of days. There would have been more documents made available. There's always a draft agreement. We can always see the agreement on the US, I think, website, like we did with the EU trade negotiation. I could get sense of the India-EU trade deal based on the draft documents that were on the EU Commission's website. So my sense is that this may be a case of India signing up on areas of trade negotiation which otherwise would have not been part of the negotiation. So we have to really look at the fine print. We may become more vulnerable on definitely two areas, agriculture and energy. The union budget has announced this sort of tax holiday for firms to open cloud centers in India. That's clearly a backdrop entry for American firms, especially with the expansion in AI that's happening and need for cloud centers. So India seems to be opening up a tax haven based investment space. So the concern, I think, here is twofold. What is really India's gain in getting into a trade agreement with the US at this point? I say that because if you look at the numbers, the India-US trade position has been only stronger in the last few months. In fact, despite the tariffs that have been imposed by the Trump administration, the average net, I think, goods exports to the US was raised by around 22% this November in 2025. And it was, yes, there were two sectors, gem and jewelry and textiles, which registered negative double-digit growth. But you have sort of telecommunications, particularly in smartphones, where the exports were over 216%, which I presume it's Apple manufacturing in India and exporting it to the US and other markets. But there was no rush for India to get into a signing agreement. I think the pressure was more on the American side, because any goods coming in from the Indian market were more costly in the American market. And the US was doing this not just with India, but so many other markets. So this was clearly having a domestic impact. And my sense is that the India-EU trade pact discussion might have catalyzed the American president to make this into a very quick, catalyzed manner. At the same time, I think one very critical matter, which I think is not getting enough attention, and I would just want the readers to be more aware, is the Indian rupee has been sliding, as we all know, right? And a lot of that was happening as a result of what is traditionally called as a capital flight. That is capital investment from India moving out to other markets. So FDI investment into India, if I correctly quote the number, had collapsed by 96.5% in FY25. Now, what does this mean? This would have put tremendous pressure on the rupee, which we have already been seeing. The RBI has said that it would not be doing more and beyond what it is doing because our forex reserves have been declining in trying to create, more dollar reserves. And so we were facing a dollar glut or a sort of, dollar drought, because glut would be excess of dollar reserves, but this is absence of dollar reserves. What it does is your rupee's value with respect to the dollar is going to depreciate, which is what we were seeing. So I would probably also anticipate that there was a need for India to get into a sooner trade agreement with the US to stabilize the rupee, and which was rightfully so. But the deal and the nature of the deal, to what extent is it mutually beneficial versus India moving from a trade surplus position with the US to a trade deficit position? This number of $500 billion is deeply troubling because India doesn't buy that much from the US. And this is going to impact tremendously domestic industrial capacity at a time when you have the weak presence of the MSME sector and employment creation as its very low point. So I don't see a lot of great incentive for the Indian counterpart to rush to a trade negotiation. The letter in spirit should still respect the red lines, and at the same time, I think it should be very clear that the negotiation which had been happening in the way it was happening is respected beyond what the two leaders have spoken.
We'll come back to some of the details you talked about and the nitty-gritties of what this deal might be. But before that, Devi, I wanted to ask you about the way this deal has been announced. And diplomatically, is this extraordinary for them to tell us there's a deal, but then for us to not have any deal to look at?
I don't think it's extraordinary for Trump because that's the way he's dealt with all the deals since August. He was supposed to do 90 deals in 90 days, right? If you remember correctly. And that has not happened, obviously. But this not be the classic way of doing a trade agreement, but this is a classic Trump, basically. And he always announces it, and the details are then left after that to be worked out. And this has happened with all the agreements that he has done. Starting from Vietnam, Indonesia, South Korea, EU, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, it's not at all surprising that this has happened in this way. And if you remember also, that's what the US side had also wanted, that the Commerce Secretary Lutnick has said that they had wanted a phone call from the Prime Minister to come in July. And that's what they wanted, the phone call, and then the announcement and a tweet is usually the next step. And that's what has happened this time too.
Yeah, I also want to ask you, one of the things that our Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has said was that this is a great deal and that India has managed to leverage Prime Minister Narendra Modi's personal friendship with Donald Trump to get a much better deal than so many other countries. Does that seem true to you?
Well, if you look at the number, the tariffs rates which are there for the other countries, I was looking at. So they are, for example, Vietnam, I think has 20 or 19 at this right now. Then there are other countries. So we have the difference between, we have got a lower rate, but it's not that much. It's about 1% at the most, 1 or 2% at the most. The difference between with India. So I mean, if this is talking about leveraging friendship, then there should be a higher rate, obviously. But okay, if you get a lower rate at the same time, that's fine. But it shouldn't have taken this long in that sense. For if he's he has been Trump had been again and again saying he's a great man and so on and so forth. So this has taken the longest time for the US to reach a deal with any other country. So if there has a personal friendship, which is a factor here, it shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have taken this long.
So I would probably say it's an asymmetric friendship, so as to speak right now. 18% on Indian goods in American market and 0% of American goods in Indian markets. It doesn't speak of reciprocal arrangements at all. It's a clear violation, first of all, of the most favored nation clause of multilateral trade. India has never really said anything about this, which is quite strange, given the history of India-US trade disputes in the WTO itself. Just because I think the idea was that at no point of time an over and hyperly sensitized, emotionally guarded personal friendship of two leaders should not come in the way. And I think that has come in the way. Trump has been smart enough to over leverage that, because he might have just given a call saying that we want more out of the deal, just clearly not seeing enough in for the US. And that's where I'm saying that what has happened is maybe the US president has used the sort of pitched friendship between two countries. We see another evidence of this. So I'm not saying this out of thin air. I think the discussions around the buying of Russian oil was never part of the India-US trade negotiations. In fact, if you see any documents, there's no discussion whatsoever. The External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, has actually said this multiple times on record, that the India's purchasing of Russian oil was never part of any discussions in the India-US. But Trump made it about that. And now what has happened is they've clearly said that India stopped maybe buying Russian oil and it will buy more from Venezuela, and using that call perhaps, or a discussion as a way to get a India-US trade negotiation. So I think India has sort of strategically given up a lot of leverage that it has otherwise had with the US. On trade, we have done very well with the US. Services ignored. Even goods, manufacturing sectors, including textiles, were having huge bulk orders, and it was definitely a negative impact. But we were right to strategically realign with other countries. The EU trade negotiation, or our discussions of negotiation with different parts of African countries, all of this was being done as a part of a strategic realignment. So I think there is a sort of, I would say, within the intrinsic motivation of the government to be more desperate to cow down to the US, and I think make this whole a success story about the two negotiations. If you look at the discount mechanism India had on the Russian oil import, my sense is, and if the numbers are correct, there would be at least a 7.5 billion annual inflationary hit to the Indian consumer with the change of the $60 to barrel Russian crude oil to $75, which is what the US has pushed. The reason I mention this number is because we have been very lucky in having lower fuel prices for the last few years, because as you know, the state was charging tax on retail price of fuel, and so was the central government. They have profited out of the lower prices in fuel we were importing at. Now you might have an inflationary spiral if we continue getting oil at a price which is no longer the discounted price. So I think we have to look at a lot of things intersectionally linked to the trade negotiations, and also wait for the final details to see where India has given a lot of leverage.
Yeah. Can I also add that we should also remember that trade is not the only issue that we have with US right now. We have the issue with Pakistan. So if we hype up the friendship between the Prime Minister and President, you have to still account for how the President Trump brought out Pakistan from the cold. And there may be other things which are going to happen in the next few months or 1 year. You never know what is Trump going to do with Pakistan, or what he wants to do with Gaza, and what Pakistan is willing to give them. So there may be more embarrassing moments which may be waiting to happen soon. So I think it's better to basically not. I would have advised that it is better not to raise too much, about this friendship or the personal relationship between the two leaders at this time.
Yeah. And Devi, I wanted to ask you also about the subject of Russian oil. Now, this is something, as Deepansh was also mentioning, the External Affairs Minister has spoken of in the past, and also said that, who India chooses to import oil from is a decision that's made based on national interests and what is working for the economy and for the people. Now, recently, just yesterday, we've had Piyush Goyal say that, India is anyway, diversifying its energy imports because it's required for India's population and their energy security. Do you think this is something India has backtracked on, if in fact we've agreed to stop importing Russian oil?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the euphemism that we have been using for last few months, if not just right now, is that we are diversifying our sources. And especially even when I think the German Chancellor was here, and even in December, we had briefings, background briefings, and we were asking them about the Russian oil issue. And we were told that, again, the euphemism that they were using is that we are going to diversify. We are just looking at diversifying our sources because it's a matter of commercial interest. And specifically background, they had told us that commercial interest includes the sanctions which are imposed. Because at that time we were talking specifically when the German Chancellor and other EU leaders were coming, we were talking about the EU sanctions on Indian entities, Nayara Energy, and so on and so forth. So this is we have seen the downward decline in the imports of Russian oil. We have got the numbers from Kepler today, and we have seen that the peak was in basically June. And then after that, it came down, rose a bit after that. And then again, it was basically going down more or less consistently. So it has been, we have actually stopped, we are going to, if you see we got the figures also of the other foreign suppliers, and if you see while Russia is going down, the line for Iraq is going up, the line for Saudi Arabia is going up. So that means obviously we are increasing our buying capacity from these countries, which were already, Iraq was our biggest supplier, by the way, before Russia took over. But interestingly, our numbers from US are still not that great. I think it was about in November, it was quite substantial. I mean, not substantial, and that was quite good for that year. But it has still remained pretty low in that sense. So I don't know if we are actually going to buy there. And Venezuela obviously has been zero for the last 1 year and so on and so forth. And again, I don't know if we are going to actually buy from Venezuela, or will it be through the US? What will be the mechanism for that?
I mean, the way Trump presents it, either way it will be
US anchored.
US anchored and US companies and US interests that are involved.
I think Venezuelan oil, there was also an old trade dispute in the WTO between US and Venezuela. The Venezuelan oil would always have some processing done by American oil companies when it would even come to the American market. So it's quite, I think what India was doing with its oil channel of distribution with the EU, you might see the US doing now a lot of that, which is India was securing at a discounted rate Russian crude oil. It was processing it here and then was exporting it to the EU, right? And that's what America and American oil companies want to do with the Venezuelan oil. So I think these things in terms of processing of details tend to often be missed out, but it's important for maybe viewers to, I think, keep this in mind that trade negotiations are now, as you said, is not entirely about trade. It's always about geopolitical pressure points. And India has, I think, succumbed a little bit in its strategic interest to America in the way it wants to strike a balance, mostly because there is a hyper emotive context of a friendship or a relationship between two leaders. And maybe that's the era of strongman politics we are living in. No?
And if trade agreements or whatever you call it, a trade deal or whatever you call it, are done by proclamation, they can be removed by proclamation also.
As well, yes.
Yeah.
So it's not anything, I mean, even if it's written down, it doesn't matter anyway, because, for example, see what has happened with South Korea. He has basically been unhappy that they are not enacting, they're having some delay in enacting their, ratifying the trade agreements there. So it doesn't actually, even if you get a joint statement and even if you have an executive order, it can be all, undone by a tweet again.
Yeah. And definitely, I think for observers in India particularly, the details are, like you said, going to be very important, particularly when it comes to agriculture and other sensitive sectors. And I think we'll all be waiting for that to come out. But I want to move on to what we wanted to talk about next, which is, in a way, this trade deal announcement that Trump made came at a time when he perhaps needed a win and needed to move headlines away from other things that were happening in the US, which was the release of the Epstein files. This is the latest tranche of emails that have been released. And what has been interesting for those of us in India has been that there is correspondence between Jeffrey Epstein and two prominent Indians, Anil Ambani and Hardeep Singh Puri, that is part of these Now, I want to make it clear that this had nothing to do with the crimes that Epstein was involved with, accused and convicted for. They were talking about politics and other things. And in fact, interestingly, Anil Ambani, it is suggested, was perhaps presenting himself as a representative of the Indian government. So Devirupa, I know you have gone through these files in quite a lot of detail and written about it. So can you talk us through what exactly was going on here?
So these files, Epstein files, are basically all the information that the US prosecutors had got for investigating the two investigations that were done against Epstein in 2006 and 2019. And these files are basically includes just all emails and iMessages, but also includes a lot of things like financial statements. It's like they talk about 6 million files. And the last tranche, in which the US Department of Justice has said will be the last tranche, was released just recently. So we have gone through the files, and basically there are only two people India related who are mentioned there. One is Union Minister Mr. Hardeep Puri, who is a former IFS diplomat. Again, let me be very clear that that's again, he was only mentioned when he was not he had left the service at that time. He had already retired, and he was with the executive vice president with the IPI, with the International Peace Institute in New York. And he had met, from what we could understand, Epstein at that time through the IPI, because they were involved in doing fundraising, and they're basically doing a lot of research on UN, United Nations at that time. So that's how they had met, and we had spoken to him. The Wire had spoken to Mr. Puri, and he had basically said the only thing that we had found was basically he had written a letter to Epstein and to another billionaire that Epstein had basically, who's a LinkedIn founder. And basically, he was giving him the idea about what are the opportunities in India, about digital India, that these are the great language facilities here, and so on and so forth. And that was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 2014 or 15 maybe, 2015, before he joined. The other interesting part that we basically were looking very deeply was the mention about Anil Ambani, who I think everybody in India knows who is. And what we have managed to trace out, this is according, we be very clear, this is according to the emails. We don't know anything beyond that. They were introduced first in Epstein and Ambani through the chairman of the DP World, Dubai Ports World, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayam, in 2017. And they had correspondence after that. And in that first correspondence, that was in about March, April, he had mentioned that basically he had said that I'll just read it out what he had basically said, is that on March 16, 2017, Ambani sent a message from Delhi, and he said, leadership would like your help to meet Jared and Bannon ASAP. So obviously, leadership, we are assuming, again, this is all assumption and speculation right now, is basically the Indian government, and that they would like help with talking to Jared Kushner, who was the son-in-law, and Steve Bannon, who was there in the White House at that time. And then he again goes on to say, likely visit to DC by PM in May to meet Donald, also assistance on that. So from that, after that, the interesting part was in 2019, we got another mail, and where Epstein is basically telling Bannon that Modi's guy is coming that Modi has sent somebody to meet me. And he said it's going to happen next Thursday. And by triangulation, basically that is April 23, and triangulation and going through all the schedule, we only found that the only person who he was meeting, an Indian person, was Anil Ambani on April 23. So we have given messages and requests for comments to Anil Ambani and to all his associates to basically clarify these points. And we await, if we get any further comments, we will basically ask them and obviously add to our story.
The only response we've had so far from the Indian government on this is that none of this should be taken seriously because this is all based on the words of a convicted criminal. Deepanshu, I want to ask you, do you think that's it, we should leave it where it is, or are there some questions that are raised around this?
I think what the entire sort of I would say scandal presents is a very sobering reality of how elite behavior is shaped, not just in America but outside America as well. Since we have now so many names flagged of what would be part of the political, intellectual, business elite, all engaged with Epstein in some way or form. And what does it say about, sort of elite behavior operating with perhaps, a violent impunity and sort of a moral, this heightened sense of moral degradation, where the structures of power, those who have more responsibility, are engaged in spaces of dialogues or conversations which otherwise are not part of an officiating channel. I mean, Epstein was not in any way responsible for representing the American state in an official capacity. It also talks about this deeper state that exists and how, structures around from power lobbying to power shades work. There is no grand gestures in a political economy sense. There is no even political economy, which one can align. What we see is, a veneer sort of uh, structure of power where, I mean, in the usual sense, older terminologies of islands were seen in the Enlightenment era as these spaces where all prohibitions would go out. You have unlimited form of intelligences where people would do for whatever meanings, sexual, financial. And what I think Epstein scandal represents is a sort of reflection of that, which is troubling from the standpoint of how power dynamics work or how power politics work, but also how elite behavior shapes itself when it engages with an individual who's representing so much, and I think in that sense what has been troubling deeply to me personally has been the nature of involvement of the intellectual elite. I mean, you have so many now troubling details of Noam Chomsky and others who have been involved, including the former, I think, US Treasury Larry Summers, who was a leading economist in the US. Almost all of them, and it's mostly all men, who have been involved in engagement of some kind. And the email chain gives you the semblance of a relationship. Now, where I think this all points out to a very deeper state of moral corruption, which exists in elite behavior. And if there's anything that one should probably take in the sense of understanding from the whole scandal at large, I mean, clearly a lot of people would go unchallenged, unconvicted, unnoticed. It's just a sense of details coming in where people understand really. It is for the whole world to see how power structures work. But my sense is that it is very critical to also see how decision making at the topmost level sometimes is susceptible to the operation of lobbying forces and special vested interests, which are signified by these forms of elite behavior. So I think that's where I would probably see those observations to be at.
Nirupa, I want to ask you also, maybe particularly from the Indian perspective that you have been studying, are there questions you have been left with over this whole correspondence?
Yes, I am interested in why we need to have a track tool, for example, to contact Jared Kushner or Steve Bannon, because that is something that we should be easily able to do through our embassy. And they would be willing to, I'm sure, willing to engage with the Indian government. I'm not sure what kind of leverage would it help to contact them through this kind of, I'm not able to maybe envisage or imagine it, through this kind of, obviously we know that Steve Bannon was very close to Epstein and he has been this thing, but he was out of White House. He was there in the White House for a very short time. Then after that he was out of it after that eventually. So I'm not able to, again, what does it, I think it's basically, again, is what he said is as a reflection of elite behavior in that sense. Ultra wealthy people, basically, everything, money is magnetic, basically, money and power is magnetic. So, and it basically powerful people, or at least people who think they're powerful, they like to talk to each other and try to have some give self-importance to their conversations, and they feel that they are the movers and shakers.
It's very interesting. You look at American politics, like Democrats have been named, Republicans have been named. I mean, what does it say about the general nature of American politics at large, right? So, India is in that sense, I mean, there is an expectation as the kind of moral exceptionalist power the US has been and a vanguard of appearing to be transparent democracy. If it is reflecting itself to be, this is perhaps the lowest point in American politics and American sort of hegemonic incorporation I can think of in the post-World War era. Because on every front, it is exposing the reality of how American politics work. I mean, Kushner's involvement in the way the peace negotiations with Israel and others have worked out with the Shaka I think, summit where Egypt and other Arab nations were involved. It's also a plan which Kushner himself has been involved. There is no official channel, of course, the US state has been involved. So it shows how Trump operates. He relies on two sides of information channels for decision making to happen. And I think that's what is really troubling.
Okay, I'll move us now to the final topic we are discussing today, which is that there has been chaos in Parliament for large parts of this week, to the extent that Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not even speak in the Lok Sabha in response to the President's motion of thanks, which is quite unprecedented. All of this is over a book that we can't read. These are the memoirs of former Army Chief General Naravane. They're called 4 Stars of Destiny. And it was supposed to be released around 2024. Copies had been printed. It was available for pre-order on the publisher's website and on Amazon. And then suddenly it disappeared. And since then, it's been said that it's awaiting some approvals. And this book, a large part of it, this book was read by a journalist at the Caravan, Sushant Singh. So in this book, General Naravane is talking about his time as army chief and what happened when China started making incursions into Indian territory, and then he tried to contact the political leadership, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, who must have called the Prime Minister, and was asking, what to do about this. And he was told कि आप जो उचित समझिए वो आप कीजिए. And to him, this was like being handed a hot potato, is how he has put it in the book, according to the Caravan report. Now, Rahul Gandhi has tried to read from this article in Parliament and been stopped because union ministers, including Amit Shah, said you can't read from a book that's not published. Then he brought a copy to the Parliament to say that everyone in India should be able to read this book. But I want to ask you both, from what we know, based on what's in the public domain about what this book, what is in it that makes it so unpublishable, something we can't talk about?
I am frankly a little baffled by the whole controversy. I'm not able to understand what was there. If I'm going by the Caravan report on what is published, I'm not sure what is there that much which is that controversial that it requires to be censored or not be published at all. I don't think it can be. And he has himself, the Caravan report itself said that has praised, that General Naravane has praised the current government also, in lots of places, and he has not made a criticism of the government as such. Right. So it's very surprising, and it's become an issue only, I think, largely because of the reaction of the government. I don't think if the government had reacted this way, or if it would have actually, had just been published it. Yeah. I don't think there would have been much of a reaction at all. In the same way, in that sense, we were also thinking, I think the MEA, for example, on the Epstein, if I'm just go back to the Epstein file, the MEA reacted on the Epstein files, if you remember the first day, when there was when the Congress was raising some points about that basically there's some Israel issue, and that PM had gone to Israel to do a song and dance on the on the instructions of the US president, and MEA reacted on that. I'm not sure the media would have even reacted or even reported on what the Congress had said unless the MEA had reacted then. So it's basically, I think, I'm not sure what is the media advice here which is being given, and what is the I'm frankly baffled, puzzled about the whole thing. I mean, what is the, because even if you see even the Caravan report, actually everybody in the media here and everybody else knew about the book. It had been there. I think PTI even had some kind of reporting excerpt from the report in a few years ago, 2 years ago.
In 24, yeah.
24. So it's nothing new per se as such, but the reaction has been like quite strong. I'm still trying to decipher it.
I probably see this as a function of a long trend or behavior within the government, which I probably presume is deeply insecure about any possible views that are perceivably contrarian to the party's positioning, which tries to centralize power. And I think this, if there was any evidence of how a party state functions, I mean, this is pretty much it, because the government may have very little to say or do. I mean, an army chief, whatever he or she writes, the separation of power between the military and the government. So he or she is totally in a position to write freely. I don't understand what's the issue with the publication of the book. I think that's a far greater issue. I mean, the degree of censorship, if an army chief is not allowed to put facts out, publisher feels right. Because it also talks about the politics of publishing and what it means. The publishers would be even now more reluctant for people who are not entitled and as being army chiefs to publish any work which may be perceived. So there's a larger signaling of that. Clearly that is there. Second, anything that perhaps the opposition would say, or the Congress would say, or the leader of opposition would say, it seems, since it is supposed to be opposed by the party, which is the ruling party, the state will also oppose it and they will do everything possible. To give you an example, the way parliamentary procedures, as I think K. Venugopala Rao has written recently, been used and weaponized against the leader of opposition, that the matter of discussion is not pertinent to the matters of the parliamentary procedures. It's an absolute farce. And I think what we have to be very careful about is that the optics or the theater of democratic conduct, which is now increasingly becoming so less valued in parliamentary form of deliberation, we are reaching a threshold point that any form of discussion in parliamentary reference would just not matter. I think it's also it also signals something which I feel is important as a lesson for the opposition at large, that maybe, and I think this has to do more as a sort of an assessment of how Rahul Gandhi makes this, as being the leader of opposition, the issue that he wants to make. If this is something that he feels it's a strong enough issue, then he has to go with it. I have seen in many cases a lot of important issues raised in parliament which the opposition fails to provide any continuity on. If it's an important issue, you're not allowing the army chief to publish what he wants. What happened really between, we don't know. There's a lot of unknowns with the India-China border clash, and the government wants to clarify. So you push yourself a lot in terms of opposing it. I think the opposition itself plays a lot with respect to what the government wants sometimes to do. So it makes an issue out of something for a period of time, forgets it on its own merit, until next time something else happens. And I think it's a far deeper issue. I see a very insecure government, which it has been, which doesn't allow any information, even remotely perceived as contrarian to its thinking. And it just wants to, I think, this ruthless Machiavellian size of control establishment creates a huge and enormous trust deficit. I think people at some point of time, and I too seen that across regions, you see evidence of it, will see through that trust that they're lacking between the state and the society at large. Because who would you actually trust for anything? You can't trust an army chief's book. You can't trust anything that anybody else is saying. The opposition has no sanctity in terms of its own sacred presence. So whatever is supposed to be the truth, the belief in that truth would come from the state or the government. And I think that has been the stalemate of authoritarian regimes. I come in from Cambodia, which is a place that it's a similar country which for the last 3-4 decades have only believed whatever the state has provided it. So I think that's where I would probably look at this current episode.
Yeah, and just my final question to you, Devirupa, on this is, are there questions on the India-China border clash, on the loss of territory that India has not really talked about, that you think might be what is leading to this kind of censorship on the matter?
Yeah, because there is complete opacity on actually what has happened on the India-China border. So we don't really know at all like what has been the the agreement reached also between both the sides. There have been a lot of questions about that. That the government has said that it's not buffer, it's something else. We are still allowed to patrol, but there's no clarity on that. We still haven't done. We have done the local disengagement at that time, but there are still other processes that we have to go further. That has not happened, but we are still continuing to we slowly have a thaw with India and with China. And I mean, there's also again a lot of uncertainty about that in that sense, because when we speak to the Chinese side, they say that India is going slow on some of the points. They had said that India didn't want had gone slow a lot on the direct flights, for example. They had wanted it very fast, much earlier. Then there's an issue about the reinstatement or appointments of journalists from both sides. We had Chinese journalists, Xinhua journalists were expelled from here. That has not yet happened. That is supposed to be one of the one of the points that when Wang Yi and Jaishankar and Doval had talked to each other, that was one of the points there. That has not yet happened. So there's a lot of issues that are still to be reached. There's a lot about the early harvest matter that India had agreed to early harvest negotiations for the early harvest. So we really, most of the time, we don't really know what is happening on there. And the questions we even ask the questions at the briefings, but the answers are not really deep enough, or they don't give me much satisfaction, frankly.
Yeah, and this is definitely something we'll have to wait and see on, whether any of these points become clear and whether this book that we're talking about does see the light of day. That brings us to the end of our conversation for today. Thank you both
Thank you
so much for joining me, and thank you all for watching.